who was one of the families that farmed in Mission Valley along the San Diego River. We want you to tell us all your stories about it. In particular, what did the San Diego River mean to you?
Well, let's see, how can I start? After the World War II was ended, the government released us from those camps that they put us into during the war years. So we came home in 1945, September of 1945, and at that time I was 15 years old. I was the oldest son still remaining at home. My 4 older brothers were still in the service. They had not been discharged yet from the war. And so my father started farming in Palm City in 1946. And then when we got word that the boys are going to be discharged coming home from the war, my dad decided we need a bigger farm instead of this one we have in Palm City that belongs to Ed Lustelid. So he started looking, and there weren't very many vegetable farms available at that time. But he got wind of the old Mission Ranch in Mission Valley. So he went there in 1946 to look it over and whatnot, and there was a man named Adolph Gluglementi. He was a bachelor. He was farming it, and he wanted to retire. So my dad made the arrangements, and we leased that property. Either it was late 1946 or early 1947, my dad leased the property, not from Adolph, but for the Poor Sisters of Nazareth, who have an orphanage up there in the old mission property. And so my dad took possession of that old mission farm, I would say, in 1947. I was still in high school. So we farmed both pieces, the old Mission Ranch in Mission Valley, and we farmed the piece of Ed Lustelid's in Palm City until I got out of high school, which was 1948. Then we physically moved to the old Mission Ranch in Mission Valley. And that was 35 acres of land there. And so we set our roots in Mission Valley in 1948, basically. But I had an uncle, Frank, that had a farm in there before the war years, that farmed up the river in Mission Valley. So we were real familiar with Mission Valley. So that's when my dad thought he would like to go back into that Mission Valley area if we can. And anyway, we were successful in finding this piece of property. We couldn't buy it. We didn't have the money anyway. But the mission, the Poor Sisters of Nazareth would not sell the property. Poor Sisters of Nazareth, from what I was told, headquarters are based in Scotland. So they would have to get their okay from up there to do anything with the property. So anyway, in the meantime, we leased the property. And we were there 1947 until 1966. So we were there about 20 years. But during the period we were there, 1948, I joined the United States Air Force. I was 18 years old and I didn't really want to be a farmer. So I joined the United States Air Force. And at that time, in 1948, the military would allow us Niseis to join the service other than the Army. During the war years, you can only go into the Army. They will not accept you in the Navy, the Marine Corps, or the Army Air Corps. But by 1948, they had integrated the services, so I was able to join the United States Air Force instead of joining the Army. So I spent 4 years in the Air Force. And then I got out in 1952. That's when I became a full-time farmer with my brother George. He's the one you should be interviewing, but he's been gone many years now. He was really the boss, and I was kind of his lieutenant. So,
what did you grow?
We are a vegetable or truck farm, so we grew nothing but what we call row crops. You know, you make furrows and you plant things. And so one of our big crops was lettuce. We planted lettuce. We planted cucumbers. We planted bell peppers. And you plant these crops, the season is going to dictate what crop you could plant. Lettuce and cabbage and romaine are winter crops. They could take colder weather, so you plant them in the wintertime. Tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers are warm weather crops, so you plant them in the summertime. You know, and so we planted crops 12 months out of the year there, 12 months out of the year. And it's called the Old Mission Ranch, from what I was told by the sisters up there in the Old Mission, that this is the very first commercial farm in all of California. It was the Old Mission Ranch. And it was first farmed way back in the 1774 or something like that. You might check with the mission to verify that. And when we were asked to leave in 1966, because they're going to sell the property now, they want to build condominiums there and whatnot. And then at the same time, we leased more property across Ward Road from Joe Guglielmente and his sister. She was married, her name was Shoemaker. And Joe Guglielmente, so we went and leased his property too. And when we leased his property, we wound up with over 100 acres of farmland. My brother George, myself, and my mother, we were three of us kind of farmed. I mean, George was really the boss, but I handled the checkbook, so he didn't know it, but I was in charge of the money. Yeah, so that's the way we operate. And again, in 1966, San Diego wanted to build a stadium there, that Jack Murphy Stadium. So Joe Guglielmente tells us, hey guys, the city is going to take this property and I have to sell it, so you guys are going to have to leave. And so we got booted out of there because they wanted to build a stadium. So at the same time, the Old Mission Ranch was selling too. And if you look at it today, it's nothing but condominiums down there. And so...
And was the 100 acres actually now part of the stadium?
It's all part of the stadium now.
So
Yeah.
condominium
Yeah.
stadium.
Yeah, well, the condominiums are now on the Old Mission Ranch, okay? Then across the road and Ward Road is where Joe Guglielmente had that farm. But not only him, Ed Bryden, or his father, Art Bryden Sr., and his son, Art Bryden Jr., you know, those three had a dairy farm right there. And then on this side, there was another Guglielmente that lived there, had a small farm. So between our farm, the Old Mission Ranch, and Joe Guglielmente's farm, Ernie Bryden was in there with his brother and father, and there was Louis Guglielmente in there, and they had to sell too. So, you know, they're all gone. All those three farms are gone. And so, yeah, we farmed that ground where the stadium is built today. And we were we're the last people to farm the Old Mission Ranch commercially. And that was 1966. So that farm would have been active for what, over 200 years.
So what was the valley like in those years from 48 to 66?
There was no Interstate 8 in those days.
What was the road?
Yeah.
What was the road like?
Camino del Rio, or whatever, I think it's called El Camino Real, I think it's called. That's the road, curvy old road like that. I used to take when we harvested vegetables, load on the truck. We had a 2-ton flatbed truck. We haul it into the San Diego produce market, where the old gas lamp is right now. That's where the produce markets were. And I would drive it, and I would go right past Pete Ferrari's dairy and honk at him and wave at him. He's got cows, milk cows. And I keep going, and down the road you had Holiday Farms. There was two brothers there, had another little dairy, and they had a kind of a retail outlet. In fact, they used to come to our farm and buy some of our corn to sell it over there. And yeah, we used to haul the vegetables all the way to San Diego.
Maybe that's where we used to buy corn, because in the 50s when I lived in La Mesa, we used to go to the beach. We'd always stop in Mission Valley to buy corn for our barbecues.
Yeah, you know, actually the Segawa farm, that's what we call our Segawa ranch, we really were copycatters, okay? In the valley, down there where May Company is now, down there, Bill Miller's family owned that property. And his neighbor there was Ross Bond, who was another farmer. And those two already had little stands on their farm. And my brother George and I said, and then Bill Miller, you know, he's telling you guys should have a stand, you guys should have a stand, you know. And Ross Bond is telling us the same thing, you should have a stand. I understand Ross Bond moved to Ramona or someplace, you know. A part of his family, I'm sure, is still living, you know. And so we used to do a lot of kind of horse trading. Bill Miller, when he started his stand on his ranch, his wife, oh gosh, she was an attractive woman. She ran the stand, and it was so successful, they run out of corn, she would call me up, man, you got any corn you can sell me? And so we were selling the corn so she could keep the stand going. We did the same with Ross Bond. Yeah, we horse traded back and forth so they won't run out of product to sell, to lose their customers. So we got real acquainted with, you know, our neighbor farmers. That was a lot of fun there, you know, trading back. We'd go back and forth to farms, and I remember Pete Ferrari, his dairy was down there, and when the Freeway 8 is going to go through, it's going to chop him in half. His cattle is down in the river bottom, his house on the side of the hill. Oh, he fought that tooth and nail. But, you know, he lost, so he was able to keep his farm. But his cattle were down here in the river bottom, and his milk barn was up on the side of the hill, and that's where he lived too. So freeway going through there, how are you going to get the cattle back and forth? So he had the freeway build him a tunnel. If you, I don't know if the tunnel is still there or not, there's a tunnel from his milk barn to the bottom of the riverbed, where his cattle roam. The cattle go back and forth. You know, you milk cows every 12 hours. So we used to, he'd come down, we'd give him vegetables, he'd bring us milk. He says, you know, us Asians, we don't drink much milk. Yeah, so we used to do a lot of that.
That's great. What about the swimming holes? Kay talked a little bit about them. Were they still around?
They were still around on our farm on the old Mission Ranch, okay, that would make it the east side. That's where the river was. Just right at the edge of our farm was the river, okay. And then on part of edge of our farm, there's a man that had a sand plant. He used to dig for sand and wash the sand. And you could go swimming right in that area. I never did go swimming down there, and he used to pump water out of the river to wash the sand. And we, the Segawa brothers, we pumped water out of there to water our fields. In fact, we even had a permanent well there, a pump. It was there when we moved in, because Adolf Gugelmeni says, this pump supplies enough water. It didn't. So my brother George and I, we got a big engine and we put a pipe out there in the river bottom. We didn't have any permit to do this. We just did it.
So you put the pipe straight into the river?
Straight into the river.
Instead of a well? Instead
of the well, yeah. And pumped water, and we punched a hole into our irrigation system and pumped the water in that way. And we had a 4-cylinder gasoline engine, and that's how we got water out of that river to water our fields.
Do you have any idea how deep the well was that was on your property?
No, I don't, but I have to think that it was very shallow, because I'm sure that the underground strata there with the river flowing to, because this thing was right at the edge of the river, but it was a well that somebody dug there years ago apparently, and it was still operating when we moved there in 1947.
But then it stopped operating?
After that, there wasn't, the water level started going down. You know, that's when I remember we had a little raft to go out to the river to put a suction pipe in there. And we must have had that thing out there about 30 feet out in the river. And I forget how we anchored it there so it won't get washed down, because the water used to move a little bit, very slowly would move.
How wide would you say the river was in that area?
Gee, at that time, I would say the river must have been at least as wide as my property here. I would say it's 100 feet wide, where it used to border the farm where we were. Then when it crossed over Ward Road, there's a bridge there, Ward Road, it narrowed down quite a bit. You know, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Daly Corporation might have pumped water out of there too. You know, they had a plant, an asphalt plant or a rock plant right there at Ward Road and where Freeway 8 is, and on the side of the hill. They had a plant there, Daly Corporation.
What about the depth of the water where your property was?
I'm not real sure about that either, but I would venture to guess it must have been about 30 feet deep, because our suction, we had a suction, we just went down 10 feet, and we didn't hit anywhere near the bottom, you know. And as the water level started going down, we had a float on it too. I remember it was 2 50-gallon barrels or something we strapped on there, and that kept that suction pipe afloat. And, you know, looking back at that, you know, I think that must have been an illegal thing to do, but nobody said anything. So,
yeah, it's hard to know.
You know, so that's how the river impacted us. Without that river, I think that farm would have dried up. But, you know, after a while too, when they wanted to develop that property, we didn't feel too bad anymore, because the water and the soil were getting so salty, we were having a hard time producing quality vegetables. And when we were able to produce it, our quality went down, but our yield went down too, to the point where we were already thinking about, we're going to have to relocate. We had the University of California come in and analyze the farm and whatnot. They said, this ground's too salty, the water you're using is too salty, you're going to have to move. And they gave us ideas of how to overcome salinity in the soil, and you know, but you couldn't change the salinity in the water. You know, so the water is your biggest culprit here. So, and then you're mixing it in kind of a alkaline type of soil. So
During the 20 years you were there, how did the river change? The salinity is one.
Yes.
Did the size of it change?
The size of it changed drastically, where sometimes you didn't even see any water. And now we had nothing but ponds, and ducks used to come in there, I remember. You know. And pretty soon, the Ward Road, where the bridge is, where Ward Road passes over, I think many times the water didn't even flow that far. I think it ended where our farm was. Oh, I used to hear on weekend kids go in there swimming from the other side, from the Mission Gorge side. You know, I heard kids in there all the time swimming.
They talked about the footbridges that they used to build every year, that they had to rebuild them because the river would take them out each winter. Was that still again, she was pre-war, was that still a situation? That was
No, we didn't have any bridges like that. I do remember one artifact thing there, it might be of interest. When my brother George and I were farming down there, we used to have kids fool around down on the farm where the rock pile is and where there was a tunnel. And then we saw this tunnel, and it's right at the edge of the farm. And so we went, I talked to the mission up there. I says, hey, this looks like there's a tunnel here. Oh yeah, there's a tunnel here. It comes from inside the mission property, goes underneath the road, and comes out to our farm.
Wow.
And they plugged it up on their side, so I got permission from them to plug it on our side so the kids won't go playing in there. What's the tunnel for? And I was told then that when the ranch first started, way back in the 1700s, because of so many you never know what's going to happen. For their own safety, they built a tunnel from inside the mission walls, come to the farm, so they can till the soil there. And if they ever got attacked, they'll run into the tunnel and back up into the mission. And that's what I was told. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised that tunnel is still there. And we plugged it up on our side, a whole bunch of rocks, and we got tractors and just put it full of rocks and whatnot. So the kids couldn't play in there. I mean, there were snakes in there. So that was still there when we went on the farm. And another interesting thing, when we took possession of the farm in 1947 and 48, there was a clay wall still there, built by the old Padres way back in 1700s. It was still there. And there was vineyards still there, bearing fruit. And, oh yeah, and there was olive trees there also. You know, when we left, they were still there. You know, so I don't know whatever happened. There was olive trees from day one, I guess, on that farm.
Chico said there was a lot of bamboo.
Yes, there was bamboo down there in the river bottom, It didn't affect our ability to farm the ground because it did not come that far into the ground, into the farm. We had a road right at the edge of the farm, at the edge of the river. So maybe the compaction or whatever from all that traveling might have, you know, kept the bamboo shoots from coming into the farm. I used to go shooting rabbits down there. Yeah.
Any other wildlife?
Rabbits was the only thing I noticed. I know there were snakes down there, but after a while they were gone. You know, after a while, too much civilization. And in our case, right up against the mission, we plugged that hole up. So, you know, that was the only place that I saw any snakes. There was a cemetery marker there. They had one of the Padres buried on the farm. And it was a big marker. Oh, I would say it was 2 feet wide, probably 30 inches across, and about 5 feet tall. I don't know whatever happened to that. It was right at the edge of the farm, between what is now Friars Road and the mission. There was a road that went right in front of the mission. In fact, it's still there today. You know, from the mission's on the north side, the farm's on the south side, and this plot where this priest was buried was on the farm. And I bet you they must have moved him by now, probably put him in the mission property.
Right. Wow.
But there was good years. We got along great with the neighbors. I mean, we were, I think it's fair to say that we were probably the last Japanese-American farm down there in Mission Valley. And we were probably the last vegetable farmers down there, because by the time Bill Miller, he sold, and May Company built there, and Ross Bond had to sell, and you know, for building homes, not homes, but offices and whatnot. And then Holiday Brothers, they were gone. I guess Pete Ferrari, but you know, of the so-called 3 farms that were there, Bill Miller, Ross Bond, and my brother and I, we were still there. Rest of them were all dairy farmers. So I think we were the last vegetable farmers there and the last Japanese-American farmers there. Now, you look at it now, even the dairies are gone now. There was dairies all the way from the Holiday Farm to Pete Ferrari to Gluglumani's and around on Mission Gorge Road. There were more Ferraris there. I never got well acquainted with those Ferraris. I don't know why. I just stayed up close to Ward Road all the time. We never really got acquainted with them. That's where Chieko Murayama, the Yano family, were over in that area way back in the 20s and 30s. But that place is nothing but Ferraris and Gluglamentis. We got along great with them. Yeah.
That's great. That's good.
In fact, one time I remember we needed a pickup. We went to buy a pickup, and the only kind of pickup they had was the regular pickup with a steel body on it. And Joe Guglielmetti, he had a pickup, an older pickup, and he had a stake body on it. That's what my brother wanted, was a stake body thing. And then during the time of visiting with him, he mentioned about that stake body. You know? And Joe says, hey, I'll trade you. I want to keep my pickup, but you can have my body. You give me your body. So the two, we got together and brought his pickup over, and just one afternoon, we took his body off his pickup, we put our new body on his pickup, so he had a brand new body on his old pickup. We had an old body on our brand new pickup. But that's what my brother wanted, was a flatbed pickup. You know? We just traded.
That's great.
We did things like that.
Yeah.
My brother had a big welder, four-wheel welder, portable welder, and he used to go all over the valley helping people weld things. He loved to weld. So pipe break, he'd go over to the next farmer and weld it for him. And so we all got along just great. Those are good times. I was still in my 20s then.
Was there a unique social life, in particular in the 50s, for everyone who lived there, or obviously San Diego was pretty spread out by the 50s?
Yeah, no, we never did really get together socially per se. Us farmers just used to go visit each other every now and then. Tomatoes come into harvest, I'll pick some tomatoes and take it over to old Pete Ferrari. He liked to chatter a lot. You sit there and listen to his stories and whatnot. He wanted to give me milk. I says, Pete, I don't drink milk. And that was about the only social life. And even with the Brydens, we used to go visit them. They used to come visit us. And their father was still living then. He was elderly by then, but he was a nice man. We used to visit there.
From what you said earlier, it sounded like you were okay with leaving the valley with the development that was coming.
Yes, because, the soil was getting where it could not produce very well.
What about some of the other folks? Do you think you have an idea how they felt about it?
Well, I'm pretty sure, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think Pete Ferrari was really upset. He didn't want that road when the Interstate 8 went in, cut his farm in half, But I don't know how he ever handled that, but after it was built, he was still in business, and he still used to chatter about, look what they did to me. Maybe his kids are still living. I don't know if they would challenge that, but I used to visit Pete a lot. He used to come visit us a lot. I never really got acquainted with his children or his family, just him. Didn't really get acquainted with his wife either, but just us boys, we got together, tell stories. But, the other thing I think might be worthwhile mentioning is I think most San Diegans know that when World War II broke out, the government interned all of us Japanese Americans. It doesn't matter where you were born. I'm born here. I can't even speak Japanese. I got a Japanese face and a Japanese name, but that's about it. But anyway, they interned. I was gone for 4 years, from 1942 to 1945. And when the war ended, then they released us, so I just come home. Well, in Palm City, we had no problems with Ed Lusterlid renting farm to a Japanese family. He was happy to lease it to us. And then when we moved to Mission Valley in 1947, this is 2 years after the war, you would feel there might be some animosity out there because, hey, it looks like the enemy is here,